So today we have Michael Kadel, and Michael is a former boot camper, so we're excited to have him. And Michael is an executive coach. He does keynote speaking, and he is a managing partner at a company named One Accord. His topic is on succession planning reimagined, and Michael delivers keynotes on importance of forward-thinking succession planning, focusing on continuous employee development and leadership prep. Boy, is that needed these days, right? He emphasizes building organizational bench strength over simple replacement planning and fostering growth and long-term stability. Michael's approach really helps companies achieve stronger engagement, talent retention, and cultural transformation. And Michael, again, thank you so much for being with us and giving us your time. And we're going to turn it over to you now.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Christy, and to the entire Platinum Resource Group team for this unique opportunity. I see some familiar faces out there. And before I start, as Christy mentioned, I am a former boot camp graduate. And for all those individuals out there, I can tell you how valuable this platform is to all those individuals that are in transition. Because 4.5 years ago, I went through the program, and Christy and team were amazing at setting me up for success as I moved into my next chapter. So I can't thank the team enough for that putting me up for success. So thank you for that. So as Christy mentioned, I'm going to be talking about succession planning today. And succession planning covers a lot of unique different phases and journeys. And I'm going to be talking through the lens specifically through not only leadership, but if you're an individual contributor, it's also very valid to in terms of what that looks like. And I am not able to advance my screen, Christy. Hang on a second, just.
John?
There we go. Okay, I got it.
Fantastic.
Okay, so the agenda for today, I'm going to present some alarming facts as it relates to succession planning. I'm going to take everyone today through a succession planning journey, what that looks like. And I'm not only going to talk about what succession planning is, but I'm also going to talk about what it's not. And as I said, I'm going to be looking through the lens of a human resources professional, but also through an individual contributor, and also what a leader in an organization should be looking out for as it relates to the succession planning journey that I've been on in my prior career. And around the why. Why do individuals or organizations focus on successful succession planning journey? And talking about how to pivot those conversations to help everyone that's involved in the journey. So here's some alarming facts. If you look at the entire population of businesses in the country, big companies, small companies, mid-sized companies, that population, only 1% of those companies admit that their succession planning process, that their journey is outstanding. So out of that 1% of all those companies, more than 60% bluntly admit that their succession planning process is fair and equitable for all. So we're going to dig into that. So based upon that, there's a lot of room for improvement and room to grow in terms of what succession planning looks like. So what succession planning is not, it's not replacement planning. It assumes the organizational chart is stagnant, and it has a very short-term window in terms of what that looks like. Companies have somewhat confused the term of succession planning when it's really replacement planning. They provide, when a vacancy becomes available, they put stopgaps in. Let's put this person over here to fill a stopgap when they really don't have time or the scope to take over two roles. So they're competing against priorities and really creating a drag on the organization from a business operations perspective. So succession planning is really about a conscious decision in which an organization develops and nurtures employees at all levels of the organization. Yes, it's critical for an organization to focus on those critical roles, particularly in the C-suite, but it's also important that an organization focuses on those individuals that are critical to from a client-facing perspective as well as an internal process perspective. It's also important to align with senior leadership, focusing on resiliency, identifying high potentials as they go through the journey, being very proactive and very equity in terms of that, what that looks like. Creating development plans. I'm going to be talking about that a little bit later in the presentation, but really focusing on, we've identified our high potentials in the organization. Now, how do we craft a development plan aligned with our strategic plan and aligned with the goals and needs of the organization? Succession planning looks a little bit different for every organization, based upon the scope, based upon the goals, based upon the strategic planning that an organization has in place, based upon where they are and where they want to go. And alignment of succession planning is really important from an environmental, social, and governance perspective, ensuring the organization has social responsibility and really a roadmap to success. I forgot to mention, as I go through this presentation, I'm going to have Q&A at the end. So if there's any questions that come up anytime during this presentation, please put that in chat, and Amber and team will keep track of that, and I will be able to answer your questions at the end. So thank you for that. So if you get anything out of my presentation today, this is the slide I want you to remember. The difference between replacement planning and succession planning. Those organizations that have a long-term goal, that are focusing on the shifting dynamics of the market, that focus on community impact, responsibility, and looking not only at the rear window, but looking through the windshield in terms of what's happening with our plan in our future, versus those organizations that are very reactionary. They don't react unless there's a need to react. Until there's a job opening, do they think, oh my gosh, we need to put a plan in place to help solve for the stopgaps. So replacement planning, again, is planning to react, where succession planning is planning responsively, focusing on thriving and focusing on the future. So here are some desired outcomes with succession planning as it relates to the journey. So creating a succession plan for critical roles is important. Again, not just the C-suite, but those critical roles that are focused on revenue, that are either client-facing or internal-facing, that are critical to the success and to the execution of a succession plan. Creating a succession plan for the entire organization is also important. So if you're a leader of the organization, no matter at what level, you can help drive those conversations not only with your leader, but with your team to create a development plan within the team with the desired outcome of creating a strong organizational culture grounded in resiliency and innovation. So here's the entire process in its entirety. And I'm gonna dig into each one of these as we move through the presentation today. So it starts with identifying strategic plans for an organization, whether that's 1 year out, 3 years out, or even 5 years out, which is typical for a mid to large organization. And with that strategic plan, identifying key positions, identifying what we know today based upon both internal and external factors, and identifying key positions to help execute on those plans in the future. And along with that, identify those core competencies that are in concert and that will help propel an individual, getting them ready for success in the future. And as we look at those roles, looking internally at those potential candidates that we can either groom within a specific timeline and putting in together and place robust development plans, moving towards implementation of those plans. So let's talk about what those plans look like. So strategic priorities, typically an organization has 2 or 3 strategic priorities that they're laser focused on for the year. So if you look at those strategic priorities, then we have to ask ourselves, what are those key positions that we need to fill or that we need to identify in the near future to fill? And what does that timeline look like? Then going back through our organizations, looking through the emerging leaders program or emerging leaders in the organization that have the potential to move into those roles based upon what we know about them today. So let's talk about what those critical core competencies may look like. So we've gone through the strategic plan. We've identified those roles that are pertinent to the organization, both on a short-term and a long-term basis. Now it's time to put pencil to the paper of what some of those critical core competencies look like. And as we all know, as we've moved up in our own organizations, we become focused less on the tactical skills, but more on the strategic skills. Mostly, again, focusing on not only the hard skills, the skills that got us to where we are today, but also looking at some of the soft skills like executive presence, like emotional intelligence, those soft skills that are going to help with us, with leadership, but also going to be focused on supporting a culture of resiliency, innovation, and transformation. So, in my experience, I've had the honor and privilege of serving on many boards of directors from a comp committee perspective, as well as a C-suite for financial institutions. And these are some of the conversations that I've been a part of in terms of developing of others and really looking for high potentials that have the capacity, the desire, the ability, and the willingness to move up in the organization. So the voice of reason, into organizations are looking for those people that can assimilate a lot of data, that can that are open and very concerned about what other perspectives and other backgrounds can bring to the table. So they're able to decipher and use discernment and great wisdom in what I like to call removing the noise and getting down to the important points and making concrete recommendations to move a path forward. There are also individuals that are able to bring everyone along the journey with them. Their ability to not only perform at a very high level, but able to train, mentor, coach, bring everyone along on the journey so they're not what I like to call avoid the bulldozer approach, but rather being focused on mentoring and coaching so everyone wins along the team and in the organization. Also, leaders are looking for individuals that get their culture. They don't only understand the culture, but they're living it inside and out every single day. They're noted as the culture champions, those individuals that have the ability to live the core values, that understand that the core values are a core fabric of how they get deals and how they get things done on a day-to-day basis. And they're looking for leaders that lead with empathy. They coach with compassion. They they put themselves in other people's shoes to help them grow and develop and nurture. So in identifying potential candidates, um, particularly from a leadership and a C-suite perspective, it's important to look both internally and externally. You know, there may be occasions where a critical role needs to be filled within a year or even longer than that. But at the time, there may not be any identified internal candidates. So the focus then is to look externally. And the other important piece is, what does the timeline look like? And what does that recruiting look like for ideal candidates? And what does the ideal candidate look like? Being able to have a conversation about talking about storytelling of what the ideal candidate could be and what we're looking for as an organization. Again, aligning with agreed upon expectation is what is needed for that role, and being a culture champion is critical. So as far as timelines, I'm looking at really like to put it in three buckets to help simplify the concept. So for roles that within a year or less, we need to identify who is ready now. In the event a vacancy occurs, who could we plug and play to fill in as an interim replacement? That way we have identified maybe one or two or three individuals that could take the role today if it became vacant. Then we need to look at who would be ready within 1 year. So maybe that person has the technical skills to be able to take the role, but maybe they're needing some more soft skills like executive presence. Maybe another soft skill that we can help develop by assigning them a mentor to get them there. And then we look at the next piece, which is who's going to be ready within 2 to 3 years. There's going to be a little bit more coaching. Maybe we need to hire some external resources to help this person get ready from a plug and play perspective. So effective development plans. When we're creating development plans for individuals, we need to be looking at um, these are the core competencies of what they're really good at. We need to focus on leveraging individual strengths, but be open, honest, and candid about what some of the gaps are. And what mission critical core competencies do we need to develop in the individual? Um, what resources do we need? What mentors, who in the state in the organization can we assign this individual as key stakeholders? And there may be resources outside of the organization, for example, an executive coach that can help with the development of the individual to ensure we meet the timeline that we've set. Who in the organization can be internal stakeholders? Who in the organization can be that mentor, can be that coach as they continue through that journey? And again, what does that timeline look like to ensure that the development plan stays on track and to ensure the individual being developed stays engaged? So now we've created a development plan. We've got the buy-in from the person that's being developed, as well as the key stakeholders and the key resources identified. Now we need to execute the development plan. What does that look like? First of all, the process needs to be very collaborative. The individual being coached, being developed, not only needs to buy in, but we need to gather his or her commitment to ensure that he or she is committed, they've got time and able to be developed, and they're very bought into the process. Being agile and nimble, I can't stress this enough. As we all know, there's external and internal factors with competing priorities as it relates to being developed. Realizing this individual being developed has other responsibilities that are part of his or her day job. And there may be external factors like a pandemic that we have no idea that might be in the midst. So we need to be able to be nimble, to adjust, to course correct if necessary that particular development plan of the individual. We need to identify milestones, and when those milestones are reached in the timeline that they've been set out for, we need to celebrate them. Everyone likes to be celebrated. We need to recognize the individual for a job well done, and focus on the intended outcomes of what those milestones are able to look like. And keep it simple. Being able to execute a successful development plan, we want to make sure that the milestones are easy identifiable and the goals that they're set out for the individual are achievable, realistic, and being able to apply an easy process. So development plans, and as we nurture individuals, they need to be aligned with leadership. Um, it's all about culture. We want to ensure that the individual is not only aligned with the culture, and like I said before, focused on being a culture champion and being the leader and the individual that helps foster an innovative culture. We want to make sure that we're retaining top talent by developing others. That is the first step in retaining top talent to ensure that they're engaged and they're and focused on executing the plan. We want to identify and review high potentials. And in my experience, the successful organizations have what they call an emerging leading program. An emerging leader program helps to identify those high potentials. And what's amazing about this program is that human resources is the typical stakeholder of this program, but you're able to identify leaders that A, want to be leaders, but also B, that helps foster environment for them to be a leader. For example, they can have book clubs. They can help them with presentations. They can help them with leadership training. They can do all those things that are hyper focused on developing those individuals early on in the process. So then you have a really hyper focused program to be able to ping from as you develop them into a leadership program. Oversight and execution and overall guidance in the process is also paramount. So how does human resources fit into this? So human resources is a key stakeholder in succession planning. They not only help guide the process, but they really manage and lead the process. They help with the high potentials into an emerging leading program. They work with executives to ensure that the core competencies are not only identified, but they're aligned with the strategic plan. They ensure that the best in class practices are innovative but also move the needle in terms of going from where an organization is and where they need to be. Succession planning is not a one size fits all. Every organization has its unique style, has its unique approach in executing a succession plan and what that looks like. Um, and making sure that's innovative, make sure that it's agile, but also make sure that succession planning from a human resources perspectives fits into their plan and their roadmap for employee engagement. So here's some examples of companies that, for whatever reason, did not have a succession planning, and some of these you'll recognize. So these companies are all public, and these were all in the news when it came out of what happened as an event and as a result of the lack of succession planning. So Uber, Travis Kalanick was the CEO and founder of Uber, and in 2017, there was no succession planning, and due to bad behavior from his perspective, the board ousted him with no internal candidate identified. So there was a lot of reputation risk that was put out there based upon a lack of succession planning. Wells Fargo, we all know what happened to Wells Fargo. They had a scandal, and what they did, John Stump was unfortunately forced to resign as CEO. But when John resigned, what did the board do? They issued replacement planning. They put their CFO in place, which was still a part of what in my opinion, was a toxic culture. So as a result of that decision also failed. So they had to go outside of the organization to get an outside CEO to come in to invigorate the culture. And then we all know what happened as a result of that. Starbucks is another example. Howard Schultz was the visionary behind Starbucks. In 2000, he retired as CEO, and then the board had no succession planning. So 2 or 3 years after they installed a new CEO, the culture was lacked any vision, and Howard was then asked to come back in as a CEO to continue the thriving culture that he had so inspired with everybody. So here's some key takeaways and what I like to call unintended consequences from failed succession planning. There's really a loss of strategic direction. There's no guardrails. There's no specific direction or guide for an organization without a succession plan in place. There's brand and culture misalignment. Look at the examples I just gave. There's no employees are lost. There's no future. They don't see how their role fits into the broader picture, their broader purpose of the organization, which then leads to poor operating results, which could then lead to reputational damage, which happened to companies I just mentioned. So let's talk about some of the success stories. Apple is one of my favorites. So when Tim Cook unfortunately came down with cancer, he immediately took it upon himself to develop. I'm sorry, Steve Jobs rather. When Steve Jobs developed cancer, he took it upon himself to develop Tim Cook at an early part of his career. He developed, he mentored, and he also created what they called Apple University. Apple University is another form of the Emerging Leading Program. That what they do every year is they handpick, select individuals that they feel are emerging leaders that have the potential, the ability, and the willingness to be a leader in the organization, which then leads. Apple was the first U.S. company to be valued at $3 trillion. Procter and Gamble is another one of my favorites. Procter and Gamble, at the very early onset, developed an emerging leadership program for their VPs. And if you look at their C-suite executives, because of their succession planning success, all of their C-suite have been there for 35 years or longer. They don't believe in hiring from the outside. They believe in developing their existing team talent to help them grow, help them promote, and it continues to lead in consumer good innovation as a result of a very successful succession planning journey. So some of the outcomes of effective succession planning, you have a stronger organizational culture, a culture that's innovative, a culture that's focused on achievement-oriented um, um, tactics, and as a really proponent of being very purpose-driven and mission-oriented. You have an enhanced business continuity. You have not only a business that continues to be sustainable, but really is a thriving organization in terms of what they're able to do in the marketplace. You have higher employee engagement, you have increased innovation, and quite frankly, you're mitigating risk. You're mitigating risk from a reputational perspective, but also from a succession planning perspective, which then leads to improved organizational performance. So with that, I am going to open it up for questions, and and looking forward to hearing what you all have for me today.
All right, so who has some questions? You know, Michael, one thing I was wondering about is
Sure.
how does this work from home culture or desire to work from home and hybrid, how does that affect I mean, it's thrown in different dynamics, right?
Sure, sure. It's a great question. So I think with the work from home environment, it creates an even a better path in my opinion, because I'm one of those individuals that when the pandemic hit, I struggled with working from home. So what I was able to do, I was able to quickly pivot and just focus on ways to be more interactive and looking for ways to innovate through my leader and through the leadership team and through my team, quite frankly, and find ways to be more deliberate and intentional about developing others. And I actually, for example, I actually was able to create better relationships by being more intentional about having more one-on-ones and being more focused on developing others by, but because when you're in a business working environment, you sometimes take for granted that you're seeing people in and out of meetings all the time. But when you're working from home, you have more intentionality around having one-on-ones and more time to really focus on developing of others. That's at least that's what I found.
Yeah, and so I think if somebody is intentional and takes initiative in that, but you know, I'm not so sure that some of these young potential leaders even know to take the initiative. Do you?
Yes and no. Some are, but some are not. I mean, the the millennials are now in the 40s, believe it or not. And what I've seen through that particular group, is they're more willing to be involved in groups. And I look for opportunities, kind of the emerging leaders program, as I look for opportunities where I can help them grow. If I can assign them specific or delegate specific presentations to them, or be intentional about giving them tasks that maybe are stretching them a little bit more based upon what I'm seeing. And those individuals that I'm having those conversations with seem to be very more engaged in the process.
Uh, okay, we have quite a few HR folks who are on the call. What are some questions or thoughts from you all? Gordon.
Yeah. Um, it's part a question and part like I'm letting all this information, which is helpful, percolate through me. How can we use succession planning to change the culture? I know that we're talking about culture ambassadors and so forth. And I'm not saying that the senior executive team doesn't have the right culture, but it's below that one or two levels. I'm just trying to put pieces together and think about that.
Sure. Well, you have to have a champion for succession planning. And that typically starts with human resources. And for those organizations that maybe are just starting or don't understand what a succession planning journey looks like, then anybody can be a succession planning champion. And what do I mean by that? Someone that is a leader of others, or someone that doesn't even have, can start the conversation, can start, okay, this is what my development plan could look like. And it starts going to your leader and saying, this is what I'm really good at, but this is also what I feel there's a need in terms of developing of initiative. And asking your leader, what does the strategic plan look like for the organization? You can start there, just having a simple conversation. And then the next conversation is, okay, here are the 3 initiatives that the organization needs to focus on for this year. How can I have impact? What can I do where I sit in the organization to have impact on that strategic plan? And as it relates to succession, if there's an individual that is working on that specific initiative, what can I learn from them? What skills or core competencies can I learn based upon what I don't have today to set me up for success? So when that person leaves or when that person is promoted, I'm already setting myself up for that departure. Does that help?
I already turned my mic off. Yes, thank you.
Great.
Michael, I don't have a question. I just have a comment that I really liked what you said about how it's not replacement planning. You know,
Mhm.
Sometimes us as HR professionals, there's things that we just kind of take for granted, and of course I know that, right? But if I were, presenting talent review and talent management for the first time to leaders, which, I've done many times before, that's I think that's an important piece for me to call out to them.
Mhm.
Look at the org chart. Does it make sense? Does it need to evolve? And I think too many times leaders think that if you're changing something, that means you're saying that what they've been doing for the last 5 years has been wrong for 5 years. No,
Mhm.
it was probably right 5 years ago. It was probably right 3 years ago. Maybe
Yeah.
not so much the last year or two. And that's why it needs to evolve, and that's fine. That's just part of natural evolution to things. So thank you for calling that out.
Oh, well, thank you for commenting on that. It's interesting, my experience, organizational charts are great for the time, but it's over time, it's okay for them to change. It's okay for them to evolve, particularly for a startup or a growing organization that has expensive amount of growth. So, thank you for that comment.
So who else has questions?
Hey, Christy, Michael, I'm not an HR guy, but I've learned to keep my HR partners happy through succession
Always
planning.
a good thing.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. Listen, I mean, the benefits you outlined phenomenally, but I'll tell you how it speaks to me personally. And hopefully this resonates with folks. I will tell you, first of all, in my career, I can't tell you how many times I would go into an interview and that would differentiate me. Say, hey, this is how I set myself up. You know, if I were to leave this organization that I'm at right now, they would not miss a beat. The other thing was increased productivity, because as your succession planning, you have a group of folks that are just giving you their best at all times, whether they're trying to prove themselves or as part of the grooming or the preparation that you're putting them through. So, I mean, the benefits are immense. It's not just about what I think, and you defined it very well, what I think a lot of people just think succession planning is, right? Like you say, the replacement. They don't really, a lot of folks don't think 2 or 3 levels beyond. And I got to tell you, the last 20 years, it's been for lack of a better word, a godsend in doing it the right way.
Oh, thank you, Oscar. I appreciate that.
So, John, I'm gonna put you on the spot. Okay, so John Manzanares is a CIO, IT leader. Okay, so you lead geeks, right? And so in your experience, because you've led, large teams, small teams, startups, big organizations, and I anticipate, because we have a lot of clients, and we do a lot of work in the IT group, that those are the folks that aren't necessarily looking at how they grow up, into a more senior role. They're like, in their head doing code, focusing on being an engineer. But you can identify talent, and how do you approach it with them? Like, hey, you may not be thinking about this, but I see something in you. Do you have something that you can share?
I think Michael talked about it in his presentation. You're looking for those signs of potential leaders down the road, right? The folks who are building relationships, not only within the team, but also outside of the organization and working with the business, that have a mindset that thinks about the business, in business terms, not in tech speak. And then, ones who are really showing those signs, and you as a leader have that opportunity to try to identify them and nurture them. For me, speaking about succession planning, I had an interview question the other day: what is your biggest accomplishment? And my answer was, it's my coaching tree. It's the leaders that I have developed that have gone on to be my successors, that have also then raised their own leaders who took on their succession as well. But it's intentional. You have to be thinking about that longer term.
Yeah. And Christine, we were at an event yesterday, and it was really fun to see you, by the way. And you had mentioned one of your greatest accomplishments was share.
Yeah, no, I don't even know if I used the word accomplishment, but I was so proud that virtually all the people that I had hired throughout my career to work under me in my HR team had gone on to progress in their career, and some are even at my level at this point. And it's just a pride point for me to just see that success. And I made another comment that I think is really smart. And a lot of leaders sometimes feel threatened by their great talent underneath them, but you're only as good as your team. So you have to invest in your team. And as part of manager training, a lot of managers don't think about it or don't carve out time for it. And as part of manager training that I did with my managers at my last organization, coaching them on how to do proper one-on-ones so that they can develop their talent. Because I think people get so focused on the work that they forget that they need to develop their talent, not only to enhance the performance of their team, but also for succession planning. And I think I have seen some organizations that sort of keep it a secret. I don't know if you've seen this, Michael. They have this grid of people, but the people don't necessarily know that they're in line. And I think it should be very open. I think you need to know that you're a high potential, that you're being developed intentionally. And sometimes it creates a bit of competition, if you will. Like I've had people come to me and say, "Hey, so and so got sent to this leadership training. How come I didn't get sent? Or how do I get to do that?" And it creates some tough conversations, but some honest and open conversations to let that person know what they need to do to be viewed as an emerging leader or to become part of that program.
That's
So sorry, I started with you had one specific question and I kind of went on a tangent, but it's a fun topic.
That's a really good, that's a really, really good point. In fact, when you're identifying emerging leaders, it's always best practice to not only, pick one for the role, but really pick 3 or 4 because, and to your point, be transparent about them. Let them know that they're not the only candidate, but you're committed to developing them. And then obviously ask for their commitment up front because it's a two-way street, right? Being put together the resources and the important tools for them to be successful, but also it's a commitment from them, from the time perspective and just from a dedication perspective. And being transparent is the best approach from my perspective.
Well, I've sat in exit interviews before with people departing who were stars that didn't know they were stars and didn't know
Mhm.
Wow.
that we had these plans for them because the manager didn't communicate it in the right way. And I'm like,
Mm.
how did we get here? Oh my goodness. Like
Mhm.
we had all these plans for you. We invested in you and I didn't know that. And so yeah, I'm all about the transparency.
That's unfortunate. Yeah, transparency is key.
So Hillary, you're nodding your head a lot. And so I really want to hear from you because you've been in some really interesting situations. And what are some of your thoughts on this?
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Christy. And I think my nodding is, a lot with Christine. We're currently going through performance management cycle right now, and we do something called calibration. And I don't know, for those of you that are in HR, right? Calibration doesn't really exist. It's kind of like Fight Club. You don't really talk about it. It just happens, more at a leadership level. But I think what's interesting to me is that I've had a lot of leaders this year that shockingly talk about somebody on their team as their clear successor, but don't trust them enough to pull them into the conversation for them to be impactful. And so what I've been having to do a lot of work is like helping the leaders to be okay, to Christine's point, saying, hey, it's you, right? Or I want it to be you. Where are you at on that continuum? And are you willing? And then I think, previously, earlier in the conversation, when it comes to leadership and specifically the C team, there has to be a willingness to communicate what the direction of the company is. And if they're not willing to communicate that, it's very hard to bring people along. So not only just from developing what the culture of the company is, but also having people understand and know what truly is the mission, what is the vision, what are we trying to accomplish, and really being able to bring their leaders, along on that journey with them. I think sometimes people gatekeep or feel like they need to hold on really tight to, to some of their, I don't know if it's power, so to say, but what they feel as maybe power. And I just really encourage transparency in organizations. And I really encourage like an open dialogue to make sure that people are truthfully feeling like they are part of what is coming, and when you have that inclusivity, when you have diversity of thought, when you have, diversity of who's at the table, when you bring all of those voices together, like, that's what launches the company into that next space. That's what brings the succession planning truly, like, how is the company going to evolve? No company ideally wants to stay the same, right? And the voice of the millennials, the voice of, some of those different generations, they have some phenomenal ideas if we allow their voice to be heard and encourage it and support it. And some of that is how our managers are doing that, whether it's, midline manager or, executive leadership team, but presenting those opportunities. I think, for me, it's about diversity. It comes all the way back to that for me, because the more diversified we can be in our thought processes, and bring those along with the development of the company, right? You enhance culture, you enhance morale, you enhance everybody's learning opportunities. To Christine's point, there will be people that may surpass you in your, where you're at, that go on to do greater, bigger things. And I think that's what succession planning is about for me. It's also not just within that organization, right? It's how is that ripple effect reaching beyond just your organization into the community as well.
Oh, that's a really good point.
Well said, well said. Like the community impact.
So someone asked me a question to ask you, Michael. How is technology shaping the future of succession planning?
Great
That's a good
question.
one, huh?
That's a really good one. So AI is from a succession planning perspective, it's helping with actually development plans, um, using AI, and maybe Oscar is probably a good person to ask this, but AI helps with creating, thinking outside the box. What actually can go into a development plan that a leader we all have blind spots, right? So maybe AI can provide some useful use cases, or some support from a core competency perspective that they may have missed. So I think AI is going to be ever so important and should be considered as we roll out, and particularly when we execute a succession planning from an executive perspective. AI, as Oscar will tell you, changes every day, and the technology you have to keep current, and having experts that can give a seasoned C-suite leader some insights can also be very very important.
Okay, there's a couple of questions in the chat. Amber, you want to ask them? I don't see them.
Oh, sure. Let's see. The first one was just Nikisha asking if you're going to be sharing the slides. Michael, that's to you.
Yes, I'm happy to share the slides.
Wonderful. And then Mary had a question. What is the board's role in succession planning and development planning for C-suite executives other than the CEO?
Great question. So I have a whole different presentation about board succession, but the board's role has a very important role, not only in the succession planning for the CEO, but the succession planning for the entire C-suite. In my experience, the more involvement, the more the board can be a part in the development, not only in the C-suite, but in the CEO, the better off the organization is. And from a board governance perspective, it's really important to develop board members as well, because as companies have vacancies, so do boards. So it's important to create what I like to call a core competency matrix for the board. That way you can identify who on the board has specific skills, and based upon where that organization is in its journey, what core competencies is the organization missing from an oversight and fiduciary responsibility perspective, whether that's legal, whether that's human resources, whether that's compensation. So there's all these different facets a board needs to have skills on, and being able to identify those candidates early on before a board member's tenure expires or a board member decides to depart for whatever reason. So succession planning is just as important from a board perspective as it is from a C-suite or a critical role perspective.
So, hi, can I just follow up on this is Mary. In terms of the board being a part of the development and planning for all C-suite executives, can you give some more color to how you've seen that done?
Yeah. So boards have typically what they call a compensation committee. And a compensation committee has 2 or 3 board members on the compensation committee, as well as the CEO and probably the head of human resources. So it's typically 5 or 6 individuals. And one of their projects, one of their scopes is to develop individuals into the C-suite. So what happens in my experience is they create core competencies. They developing, here's what we're looking for in a chief information officer, for example. These are the core competencies that we have today, but more importantly, these are the core competencies we're looking for in this person in the future, based upon AI, based upon emerging technology, based upon where the organization needs to go from a technology perspective. So then they're having conversations about, okay, with the current CIO, what can we do to develop him or her into his or her role based upon what I just said? But also, what does that timeline look like in developing somebody else in the organization in the event that person departs? So the compensation committee helps not only help put the guardrails, fiduciary responsibility to help the CEO in those conversations, but also provides advice, consent, and recommendations on what the path looks like. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Mary. Well, probably one more question. Anybody have one?
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for the presentation this morning. It's super informative and fun, just fun stuff.
Thank you.
I'm just curious, what role should we employees play like in our own succession planning?
Yeah, great question. So first, if you don't have a development plan or you do have a development plan, it's important that you start there. And looking at, it's always good to be performing at a very high level in your current role as it relates to looking at other opportunities that are above that role. So first step is to creating a development plan based upon where you are in the organization, working with your leader in terms of what am I doing well, but more importantly, where are my gaps? What are some of my blind spots? And just have a very candid conversation with your leader that can talk openly about that. Then after that conversation, just take notes and put a development plan and present it to your boss. This is what I'm seeing based upon the conversation. And if it's a future role you're targeting, ask your leader, what core competencies do I still need to work on in order for me to possibly be selected in a future date? And what does that timeline look like? So that's where I would start the conversation. And then, which then leads into a succession planning conversation.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
All right. Well, we are about out of time. And Michael, great topic, and certainly something that many companies are considering, some are not. And so it's always something to consider, but thank you.